The red light on the recording device blinked silently in the shadows of the Élysée palace. What Netanyahu and Macron didn't know was that their most private conversation was being captured by French intelligence. But here's what will shock you. This wasn't about national security. This was about covering up the biggest corruption scandal in Israeli political history, and Netanyahu was about to drag France into his web of lies. The date was March 15, 2023. The time 11:47 p.m., Paris time. Emmanuel Macron was pacing in his private study, waiting for a call that would change everything. But before I tell you what happened in those crucial 47 minutes, you need to understand how we got here, because the seeds of this betrayal were planted 3 years earlier. Picture this: Netanyahu's hands were shaking as he dialed Macron's private number. The Israeli Prime Minister had just received devastating news. French banks had frozen accounts linked to his family's offshore companies. But what you don't know yet is why those accounts mattered so much, and how they connected to a weapons deal that could destroy both leaders. Let me take you back to where this all began. In 2020, while the world was focused on the pandemic, Netanyahu made a deal that would haunt him forever. The French defense contractor Thales had offered Israel a sweetheart deal on missile defense systems. On paper, everything looked legitimate. But buried in the fine print was something that would make your blood run cold. Netanyahu's son-in-law, through a series of shell companies, was set to receive a 15% commission on every system sold. We're talking about 2.3 billion euros in attendant kickbacks. But here's the twist: Macron knew about it from day one. The French president didn't just know about the corruption, he facilitated it. Why? Because France needed Israel's advanced cyber warfare technology, and Netanyahu was the gatekeeper. It was a devil's bargain that both leaders thought they could keep secret forever. But somebody was watching. The Mossad had been monitoring all of Netanyahu's communications for months. Not because they suspected him of corruption, they already knew about that. They were tracking him because they discovered something far worse. Netanyahu had been selling Israeli state secrets to cover his legal fees. Agent Sarah Goldstein had spent 18 months building the case. Every phone call, every bank transfer, every secret meeting was documented. But what she found in Netanyahu's personal files would shock even seasoned intelligence officers. Netanyahu wasn't just corrupt, he was a traitor to his own nation. The evidence was overwhelming. Netanyahu had provided Iran with details about Israeli military installations in exchange for cryptocurrency payments that flowed through French banks. Macron wasn't just complicit in financial corruption, he was accessory to treason. But wait, there's something even more sinister you need to know about this network. The corruption web extended far beyond just Netanyahu and Macron. Intelligence files revealed a shadow network of politicians, defense contractors, and financial institutions across Europe and the Middle East. At its center sat Netanyahu, pulling strings like a master puppeteer, using his position to orchestrate the largest money laundering operation in modern political history. The Swiss connection was particularly damaging. Documents showed that Netanyahu had been using Swiss banks to funnel Iranian oil money to European politicians in exchange for favorable UN votes. The amounts were staggering. Over $4.7 billion had flowed through these accounts between 20. British MPs had received monthly payments of £150,000 each for voting against sanctions on Iranian proxy groups. German industrialists were paid millions to provide Iran with dual-use technology that could enhance their nuclear program. Even Canadian officials had been compromised.
Now, back to that phone call.
Emmanuel, we have a problem. Netanyahu's voice was barely above a whisper when Macron finally answered. The French president was in his private study, cognac in hand, thinking this was just another wordy diplomatic call. How wrong he was. Benjamin, what's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning? Macron asked, unaware that every word was being recorded by both French intelligence and the Mossad. What happened next would destroy their friendship forever. The Americans know everything, Netanyahu said, his voice cracking with desperation. They have the bank records, the shell companies, the commission payments. But that's not the worst part, Emmanuel. They know about Tehran. Silence. Dead, cold silence. Macron's face went white. The cognac glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. In that moment, the French president realized he had been played by a master manipulator. But you haven't heard the shocking part yet. What exactly do they know about Tehran? Macron asked, though he already feared the answer. Netanyahu's response would haunt Macron for the rest of his life. They know we've been feeding Iran intelligence in exchange for keeping my corruption scandal quiet. They know about the weapons shipments we've been allowing through Syria. And Emmanuel, they know you've been taking a cut from every deal. The recording captures Macron's sharp intake of breath. For 17 seconds neither man spoke. Finally Macron broke the silence with words that would end their alliance forever. You destroyed us both, Benjamin. And for what? To save your own skin from a corruption charge. But Netanyahu's reply reveals the true depth of his manipulation. No, Emmanuel, I destroyed you. I never intended to go down with this ship. The evidence against you is already in American hands, but I made sure my name was scrubbed from most of it. You were always meant to be the fall guy. Let me pause here, because what happened next will change everything you think you know about international politics. Macron's transformation in that moment was terrifying. The polished diplomat disappeared, replaced by a man consumed with rage. But his anger wasn't just about being betrayed, it was about realizing how completely he had been maneuvered. You recorded our conversations, Macron said, his voice deadly calm. Every call, every meeting, every private moment. You've been building a case against me for 3 years. Netanyahu's laughter on the recording is chilling. Emmanuel, you really didn't understand who you were dealing with, did you? I've been playing this game since before you were in politics. Every conversation, every favor, every compromise, it was all documented. I have enough evidence to destroy not just you but half the French government. But here's what neither leader knew at the time. While they were threatening each other, intelligence agencies from 4 different countries were listening to every word. The Americans had been monitoring the call through NSA intercepts. The British were tapped in through GCHQ's French Kirchens. The Germans had infiltrated French telecommunications months earlier. And the Israelis? They were recording their own prime minister's treason. Benjamin, Macron's voice was ice cold now. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. You think you can threaten France? You think you can manipulate a G7 nation like one of your coalition partners? Let me tell you something. By tomorrow morning, every piece of evidence we have on your corruption will be in the hands of the International Criminal Court. Netanyahu's response reveals just how desperate he had become. Go ahead, Emmanuel. Release everything you have. But remember, I have recordings of you personally approving arms sales to countries under UN sanctions. I have documentation of your personal bank accounts receiving Iranian oil money. And I have video evidence of meetings that never officially happened. The conversation was spiraling into mutual assured destruction. But what came next shocked even the intelligence officers monitoring the call. You want to play this game, Benjamin? Fine. But understand that if I go down, I'm taking you and half the Middle East with me. The Syrian operation, the Lebanese weapons transfers, the Saudi nuclear negotiations, everything becomes public, and the world will see exactly what kind of monster you really are. But Netanyahu had one final card to play. Emmanuel, you're forgetting something crucial. I don't just have dirt on you. I have dirt on everyone. Every European leader who's ever taken money from questionable sources. Every weapons deal that violated international law. Every secret meeting that rewrote the Middle Eastern power structure. I've been collecting insurance policies for decades. The recording captures a moment of horrifying realization in Macron's voice. You've been blackmailing the entire Western alliance. Not blackmailing, Netanyahu corrected. Managing, controlling, ensuring that Israel's interests are always protected. But now that protection comes at a price. What happened in the next 10 minutes will make you question everything you believe about international diplomacy. Netanyahu laid out his demands with the cold precision of a master extortionist. France would publicly support Israel in all UN votes for the next 5 years. French weapons sales to Arab nations would require Israeli approval. And most shocking of all, Macron would personally ensure that any investigations into Netanyahu's corruption would be blocked by French intelligence. And if I refuse? Macron asked. Netanyahu's response was chilling. Then tomorrow morning, the world wakes up to headlines about how the French president has been secretly funding Iranian proxy wars while publicly condemning Tehran. Your political career ends, your party collapses, and France's reputation on the international stage is destroyed forever. But Macron had been recording this conversation too, and his response would turn the tables completely. Benjamin, you seem to be forgetting that this call is being recorded from my end as well. And unlike you, I don't make deals with terrorists and traitors. This conversation is already being transcribed for delivery to NATO, the EU and every intelligence agency in the Western Alliance. The silence that followed lasted 23 seconds. When Netanyahu finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. You have no idea what you've just done, Emmanuel. You think this is about politics? This is about survival, and I will do whatever it takes to survive, even if it means destroying Israel. Macron shot back. Netanyahu's final words in that conversation would haunt both men forever. Israel will survive. The question is whether France will. But there was something else happening during this call that neither leader was aware of. In a secure facility beneath the CIA headquarters in Langley, a team of analysts was frantically cross-referencing every name, every bank account, every location mentioned in the conversation. What they were discovering would worried American foreign policy in the Middle East for the next decade. The Netanyahu files, as they came to be known internally, contained evidence of corruption networks spanning 37 countries. The scale was unprecedented. We're talking about the systematic compromise of democratic institutions across 3 continents. Hidden within Netanyahu's personal communications was evidence of something called the Damascus Protocol, a secret agreement between Netanyahu, Putin, and Iranian leadership to carve up the Middle East into spheres of influence. Israel would control Gaza and the West Bank permanently. Russia would dominate Syria and Lebanon. Iran would have free reign in Iraq and Yemen. The price for this arrangement? Netanyahu would provide real-time Israeli intelligence on American military positions throughout the region. He had been planning to sell out not just France but America itself. The call ended at 12:34 a.m. By 4:15 a.m., both leaders were on secure lines with their intelligence chiefs. By 2:30 a.m., emergency meetings were being convened in Washington, London, and Brussels. By dawn, the entire architecture of Western Middle Eastern relations was crumbling. But the real consequences wouldn't be felt for another 48. Within 2 days, leaked portions of the conversation had reached journalists in 5 countries. The initial reports were devastating, but they were nothing compared to what was about to unfold, because what the public didn't know was that this conversation had revealed a corruption network that reached into the highest levels of government across 3 continents. The domino effect was swift and brutal. Within a week, Netanyahu was facing not just corruption charges in Israel, but international arrest warrants from the ICC. Macron's government was in free fall, with coalition partners abandoning him as more details of the French connection to Middle Eastern corruption emerged. But the most shocking revelation came when intelligence agencies began piecing together the full scope of Netanyahu's blackmail network. The Israeli prime minister hadn't just been collecting dirt on Macron. For over a decade, he had been systematically gathering compromising material on world leaders, using Israeli intelligence resources for personal gain. The network included everyone from minor European officials to major American political figures. The list of targets was staggering. 3 sitting U.S. senators, 2 former British prime ministers, the current German chancellor, dozens of EU officials, and leaders from across the Middle East and Africa. Netanyahu had turned the Mossad into his personal blackmail operation. Agent Sarah Goldstein's final report painted a picture of corruption so vast that it threatened the stability of the entire international order. Netanyahu hadn't just been stealing from Israel, he had been undermining democracy itself. The financial forensics revealed the true scope of the theft. Over 12 years, Netanyahu had diverted an estimated $47 billion from various sources. Israeli defense budgets, international aid packages, private donations to Israeli causes, and skimmed percentages from weapons deals. But even more disturbing was the human cost. Intelligence sources suggest that Netanyahu's betrayal of Israeli military secrets led directly to the deaths of at least 93 intelligence assets across the Middle East. These were men and women who had risked everything to protect Israeli interests, only to be sold out by the very leader they served. But even as his world crumbled around him, Netanyahu had one final surprise. 3 weeks after the phone call, as international pressure mounted and arrest warrants were being processed, Netanyahu made a final play. In a secret meeting with Russian intelligence, he offered to defect in exchange for asylum. Every piece of classified intelligence he had gathered over 3 decades in Israeli politics. The offer was rejected. Even Putin's regime found Netanyahu too toxic to touch. Denied asylum by Russia, Netanyahu activated what he called his doomsday protocol. He began systematically releasing classified information about every world leader in his blackmail database. WikiLeaks received over 2.3 terabytes of data containing compromising information on 127 world leaders. The releases were strategic and devastating. European governments fell like dominoes as corruption scandals erupted across the continent. The evidence was so comprehensive that entire political parties were dissolved. The Netanyahu leaks, as they became known, revealed that democratic institutions, had been so thoroughly compromised that the very concept of sovereign governance was called into question. How could nations make independent decisions when their leaders were being blackmailed by a foreign operative? But there's one final twist to this story that few people know about. In the chaos following the scandal's exposure, investigators discovered something even more disturbing in Netanyahu's personal files. Hidden among the blackmail materials and corruption evidence was a detailed plan called Samson Option 2, a strategy for using Israel's nuclear arsenal not against foreign enemies, but as leverage against the international community itself. The plan outlined scenarios where Netanyahu would threaten nuclear action if facing extradition or prosecution. The psychological evaluation accompanying the plan suggested that Netanyahu had become so divorced from reality that he genuinely believed he could hold the world hostage to protect himself. It was the final proof that the man who had promised to protect Israel had become its greatest threat. Today, 18 months after that fateful phone call, both leaders have paid the ultimate political price. Netanyahu is facing trial on 34 counts of corruption, treason, and crimes against humanity. Macron resigned in disgrace, his political career destroyed by his association with the scandal. But the real victims weren't the politicians who made corrupt deals in the shadows. The real victims were the citizens of both nations who trusted their leaders to act in their best interests. French taxpayers had unknowingly funded weapons deals that violated their country's own foreign policy. Israeli citizens discovered that their prime minister had been selling their security to the highest bidder. The investigation revealed that Netanyahu's corruption had cost Israel an estimated $47 billion in diverted funds, compromised intelligence, and damaged international relationships. France's losses were even higher. The scandal destroyed trade relationships worth over €130 billion. Perhaps most devastating of all was the human cost. The families of those killed by Netanyahu's betrayal have filed a class action lawsuit seeking damages of over $2 billion. The recording of that 47-minute phone call between Netanyahu and Macron didn't just expose a corruption scandal, it revealed how completely power can corrupt a leader, transforming them from protector to predator. It showed how personal survival instincts can override national interests, how decades of manipulation can poison international relationships, and how a single leader's moral collapse can threaten the stability of entire regions. But perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that in the modern world, there are no truly secret conversations. Every word, every deal, every betrayal eventually comes to light, and when it does, the consequences extend far beyond the leaders who thought they could operate in the shadows forever. The lesson is clear. Corruption is not a victimless crime. When leaders betray the trust placed in them, entire nations pay the price. And in an interconnected world, that price is higher than ever before. The red light on that recording device in the Élysée Palace captured more than just a conversation between two corrupt leaders. It captured the moment when decades of hidden deals, secret arrangements, and personal betrayals finally came crashing down. The moment when the true cost of putting personal interests above national security became impossible to hide. The final irony is that Netanyahu, who had spent decades collecting secrets and blackmail material on others, was ultimately destroyed by a secret he couldn't control, a recording he didn't know existed, capturing words he never intended to be heard. The master manipulator became the victim of his own methods, trapped by the very system of surveillance and betrayal he had created. The psychological evaluation commissioned by the International Criminal Court concluded that Netanyahu had developed what experts termed malignant narcissistic personality disorder with delusional features, a condition where the subject's self-preservation instincts override all moral, legal, and rational consideration. Today, the world is still dealing with the aftermath of this scandal. International institutions are being rebuilt from the ground up. Democratic processes are being restructured to prevent future infiltration, and citizens everywhere are learning to navigate a world where they can no longer take the integrity of their leaders for granted. And in the end, both Netanyahu and Macron learned the same harsh lesson. You can run from accountability for a while, but you can never run from it forever. The truth has a way of surfacing. When it does, it brings everything down with it.